third reading of House Bill 5008. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, ayes have it. The bill receives third reading. Clerk will read.
5015, Bannister without reference.
We're going to see what they do with 35.
Pending question is third reading of House Bill 5015.
That's on the agenda.
All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, ayes have it. Bill receives third reading. We are now on second reading, statewide uncontested bills. Clerk will read.
Next bill is 245, Senate 245, Senator Kimbrell. Education is passing out favorably with amendment number 1, which would be the committee report. Number 1, education.
Mr. Bradley is recognized to explain the amendment. Mr. Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Folks, this is the same bill we tried to explain last week relative to booster clubs. It's a relatively simple bill. It provides guidelines for the operation of booster clubs. Felons can't serve as financial officers. Clubs must register with the district annually.
AG-23.
They must submit to an annual financial
They've got
review.
3 or 4 more bills
the
before
district
this.
may, upon findings,
And
present an
then
audit.
they'll go over SC.
I'm telling you that to introduce the
They may pass it. They may
amendment that we had in committee, which just included
and send it back.
public schools
It
and
all
charter
depends.
schools. That was your amendment that we had out of committee, and it passed favorably. So we have an amendment. We have
Committee amendment, we adopt that, then Mr. Yao has an amendment coming.
So.
Okay, so we move to pass.
All right. Seeing no questions, pending question is adoption of the committee amendment, which is amendment number 1. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, ayes have it.
Number 2.
Clerk will read.
Number 2, Mr. Yao.
Mr. Yao is recognized to explain amendment number 2. Mr. Yao.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I spoke with the 7 high schools in my district about this situation, and what we had beef with was the mandatory background check and all that. And we put in there that we may, and I did that with some of the bill sponsors. With Bradley, thank you for helping me get that done. But this gives the school board an option, but it doesn't mandate these schools having to have it done. Move for passage.
Seeing no questions, the pending question is adoption of amendment number 2. Mr. Williams, recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Yao, that kind of slipped through me, and I want you to kind of repeat what you said in terms of making it mandatory or not.
What this bill did, I have like 7 high schools in my district, and the entire region I touch. What the bill was mandating that the booster clubs fund the criminal background checks and fund the other stuff, that the fingerprints and all that, mandated that they do it. Some of my high schools may have 5, 6 booster clubs. Anybody that touches the money. And what this does, it gives the school board the option to having it done. And it says that they may require it and they may fund it, but it doesn't mandate it. The mandating would have actually killed probably about half of my booster clubs in my area and many other small areas around the state.
So who is paying for it? Is it the booster club or is it the school district?
The original bill mandated that the booster club do it and the booster club fund it. This gives the option to the school board requiring it and the school board funding it if they want to do it. It doesn't mandate it. It says they have the ability to do that.
Oh, okay. I just want to be clear on it. That's okay. Thank you,
Mr. Williams.
All right. After that clarity, we are seeing no further questions. Pending question is adoption of amendment number 2. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, overwhelming ayes prevail. Amendment is adoption. No further amendments. The pending question is adoption of Senate Bill 245 as amended. Roll call is required and ordered, and we're voting on the board.
I got an S24. I love it, but if I know it's older, but if it works, why change it? So Oh boy. So they're working on S245. Then they've got H4832. Then they have H4300. And then they'll go on to 3594, which should be today. We'll see what happens. This is the House. This isn't the Senate. The House has less rhinos than the Senate does. Yeah, I know, Misha, and should. Keyword there. But today it says
All right, time has expired. Polls are closed. Clerk will tabulate.
3594 is in the
By a
part
vote
in which
of
says withdrawal of
111 to 0,
objections,
House Bill
request for debate,
245,
unanimous
Senate Bill
consent request.
245 as amended, receive second reading. Clerk will read.
So
4832, Hardy and
I don't think they can
Sandifer,
debate on it
LCI
today.
favorable with amendment number 1, which will be the committee report. Number 1, LCI.
Mr. Hardy is recognized to explain the amendment. Mr. Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the Paid Family Leave Act that allows employers to offer family leave insurance benefits to their employees. The amendment simply requires the DOI to provide an annual report to the legislature and the public on the utilization of family leave insurance, including the
they're on
number of
4832
insurers offering,
now.
the number of employees who purchase it, and a breakdown of employers who purchase it by industry and employee size. I move for passage of the amendment.
All right, pending question is adoption of amendment number 1, which is the committee amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, ayes have it. Being no further amendments, the pending question is adoption of House Bill 4832 as amended. Roll call is required and ordered. Voting on the board.
So you can see what they're doing. Then I started this a little bit halfway because they were just introducing everybody, and that's boring. Yeah, well, that's Oregon. This is South Carolina. It's different. Have fun. Don't hurt anyone or yourself. See, this is how a bill should be ratified. Right there. Look at all the yeses. That's enough yeses to just say, okay, it's good. Oh boy.
All right, time has expired. Polls are closed. Clerk will tabulate. by a vote of 110 to 0, House Bill 4832, as amended, receives second reading. We're on withdrawals of objections
You all
or
right?
requests for debate. Any withdrawals of objections or requests for debate? Hearing none, we're in the unanimous consent request. Any unanimous consent request? Seeing none, we are now on veto has been continued. All right,
That's
so
right.
we're on Senate amendments 3594, which is
Here we go.
Mr. Cox. Mr. Cox raises 24-hour point, sustained.
Cox, 24.
We're now in the motion period. Mr. Forrest moves that we
Yes,
dispense
ma'am.
with the balance of the motion period. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, ayes have it. Motion period is suspended. Now that brings us to second reading, statewide contested bills. Clerk will read.
First bill on the agenda is 3608, Mr. Hickson.
Mr. Hickson moves that we adjourn debate, a simple adjourn debate on 3608.
Hickson, simple.
All in
I
favor
don't know what they
signify by
just did
saying
to it,
aye.
but
All opposed, ayes have it. Debate is hereby adjourned. Clerk will read.
4231, Mark Smith, Judiciary.
I don't know what they did, but they did
Favorable
something.
with amendment number 1, which would be the committee report.
Mr. Elliott moves that we adjourn, a simple adjourn debate on 4231. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, ayes have it. Debate is hereby adjourned. Clerk will read.
They did something to it. I
Next
didn't
bill,
catch it.
4364, Weston Newton, Judiciary. Favorable with amendment number 1, which would be the committee report number 1.
All right, Mr. Elliott again moves that we adjourn debate on a simple adjourn debate on
Once again.
3364. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, ayes have it. That'll bring us to the next bill. Clerk will read.
4710, Mayor West, and many others. Ways and Means, favorable. The First Amendment is the committee report, Ways and Means.
Yeah, I don't understand it either.
All right, Mr. Caskey is recognized to explain the committee amendment. Mr. Caskey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to support me in tabling this first committee report. Legislative Council identified a technical error in the drafting. We have a substitute amendment following right after, and so I will step away to move to table this.
Mr. Caskey moves to table the committee amendment, amendment number 1. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, ayes have it. The amendment is hereby tabled. Clerk will read. Next amendment.
Number 2 is Mr. Caskey. Number 2.
Mr. Caskey is recognized to explain the amendment. Mr. Caskey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a bill that came out of our Economic Development Subcommittee and
They
Ways and
just went
Means.
right past it.
And there's a great deal to it, so
I don't know what they
I
did.
would ask your indulgence as I try to go through and make sure that I've explained it thoroughly. What this bill does is attempt to bring South Carolina in line with some of our neighbors in the way that we provide unemployment insurance. And by that, what I mean is that right now, South Carolina affords a base list of, or excuse me, a base period eligibility of 20 weeks for all claimants who are seeking unemployment benefits. And that means regardless of economic conditions within the state, you would be eligible for up to 20 weeks of unemployment benefits. The reality is that in South Carolina right now, our unemployment rate is at 3%. That's according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
This is the last bill on
December
the docket
2023,
today, so.
and that compares to the national.
Let's see what
Hold on a
happens.
second. Members are saying they cannot hear. Members, find your seats. Find your seats. If you got to have conversations, please take them out. But there are members who want to hear this bill. Ms. Jordan, welcome. We voted down your J. Jordan Day. Sorry to do that. We'll try again tomorrow, maybe. All right. Mr. Caskey is recognized to explain the amendment. Mr. Caskey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a belated, again, happy birthday to Mr. Jordan. I'm glad you could grace us with your presence today. Thank you for coming to work. So as I was saying, the unemployment rate in South Carolina is at 3%. That compares to a national rate of 3.7%.
I have no idea what they just
What
did.
is, I think, illuminating
We'll go
is
back
that
over
there
this
are
again. We'll rewind it and
161,000
see what
jobs
happens,
available
okay?
in South Carolina today. That's, again, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that there are 161,000 jobs open. What South Carolina has not done is brought its workforce to work. Our workforce participation rate is at a paltry 57%. Again, the state's labor force participation rate is the number of all employed and unemployed workers divided against the state's civilian population. Nationally, that number is 62.8%. So we rank, if you want to count the states, 48th out of 50 in workforce participation. If you include the District of Columbia, we are 49th. And so what this bill does is seek to index the period of eligibility for unemployment benefits to the prevailing economic conditions. And what it does to do that is it looks at the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate. Seasonally adjusted is it's an econometric device that we use to account for the fact that in the summer, for example, employment goes up and in the winter, employment is typically down. And so we're trying to capture the economic conditions in the state as best we can. And I do want to flag here because I have an amendment that will follow this one that addresses the period of calculation. As this amendment is drafted, it is a semi-annual calculation. I'm going to ask you to support me in a later amendment that will make it a quarterly calculation so it's more responsive to the economic conditions in the state. Our unemployment system as it exists today, again, affords a claimant up to 20 weeks of benefits. In fiscal year 2022-2023, 43,208 claimants in the state received 1 or more weeks of benefits. 17,827, that's 41.3%, received 60% of above 60% of the benefit eligibility period. So they used up,
starts at 11 for them and ends at 2.
Over 60% of their benefit period. And this is the number that I want to bring your attention to because I think it's important. And one of the reasons why we're trying to again, index our unemployment insurance availability periods or eligibility periods to economic conditions. So in FY 22-23, when on balance, plus or minus, we've had 161,000 jobs available, 11,991 claimants received 100% of their eligibility period benefits, meaning that they used a full 20 weeks of unemployment insurance benefits when the jobs were there. So what this bill does is seek to reconcile the economic conditions in the state with the government incentive programs, while still maintaining the compassion for those for whom unexpected consequence or unexpected events brought hardship on their families. So we're not eliminating the safety net. We're maintaining the safety net. But what we're doing is making sure that people aren't just staying out of the workforce because we're paying them to stay out of the workforce. South Carolina claimants are getting unemployment insurance benefits longer than any other state in the Southeast. And again, nearly 1/3 of claimants in South Carolina stayed on unemployment insurance for the full 20 weeks of availability. The benefits under this bill are not modified in any way. We don't change the monetary amounts available. It's only the periods of eligibility that we're adjusting. I'm happy to explain that more. But for general reference, what that means is if you are entitled to unemployment benefits,
does anyone want to work? Yeah, well, there's lots of people that want to work, but the problem is in South Carolina, there's not a lot of good jobs.
One of which is, importantly, your monetary eligibility. You have to have earned so much to be eligible.
The jobs people want?
And I'm happy to get into that. But what it means is that between $42 and up to $326 in benefits are available in the state. Nothing in this bill changes
you missed
that.
It. So did we.
What it does change, though, again, is the periods of eligibility. So when times are are good. When unemployment is below 5.5%, the periods of eligibility would be reduced from 20 weeks to 12 weeks, 3 months of benefits that would be
Yeah,
available.
who would do that? I have no
It then
idea.
imposes a sliding scale of benefit that moves up at half percentage point increments. So between 5.5% and 6% unemployment, there would be 13 weeks of unemployment eligibility available. Likewise, between 6
I
and
don't think this bill's gonna go
6.5%,
anywhere.
it would be 14 weeks. Between
they're gonna go and
6.5 and
have
7,
lunch.
be 15 weeks. 7 to 7.5, 16 weeks. 7.5 to 8, 17 weeks.
And then I'll just
8
rewind
to
it on the YouTube
8.5%,
side.
18 weeks. Between 8.5 and 9% unemployment would be 19 weeks of eligibility, and greater than 9% would be 20 weeks of availability of unemployment benefits. Some of the benefits of moving to an index system, which again, we are not alone in doing, many of our neighbors have already adopted similar postures, is that we can incentivize, or rather stop the practice of disincentivizing employees or potential employees from returning to the workforce. Up to 59% lower unemployment insurance taxes let me restate that. What we can see is a reduction of employer-paid unemployment
He's not
insurance
really good at
taxes
this.
of up to 59%. That would lower our benefit costs to the state by up to 71%. And it would ultimately ensure that we have a more financially
Yeah.
secure unemployment insurance fund. Let me just remind everyone that the unemployment insurance tax in this state is paid almost exclusively by employers. There is a federal component that's very important here, and there are some restrictions on what we can do and what we must do with our unemployment insurance regime, such that we don't come into non-conformity with the federal regulations, because they do contribute substantially here. But in terms of dollars paid out of South Carolinian pockets, those dollars for unemployment insurance purposes are paid by employers, including small business employers. And so when the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs estimate for this bill came out at a potential $34.6 million in savings for a capped benefit regime as is contemplated in this bill, that's a savings to taxpayers in the state, and largely small businesses. They're the ones who bear the burden of this tax. Of course, the tax is designed such that the revenue captured under the tax matches the expected payout. And again, I recognize this is really dry material, but I think it's important to understand that the way this all works is every year there's a projection for what unemployment benefit payouts will be, and then using a 20-step classification system, employers are assigned a classification such that the total amount of employers paying the unemployment tax, the unemployment insurance tax, match the expected payout to ensure that we have a solvent unemployment insurance tax trust fund. And really, to be fair to this body and even our colleagues across the hall, South Carolina's Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund was in a terrible place but a decade ago. In fact, in the calculation of an employer's...
Caskey, I hate to interrupt you, but your first 10 minutes on your amendment has expired. Do you request a second 10 minutes? Mr. Caskey requests second 10 minutes. Mr. Caskey is recognized to continue explaining the amendment. Mr. Caskey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I know that there are questions, and I'll be happy to take those in just a minute, so I'll try and briefly get back to the main points. Let me just emphasize here that our system can be more solvent, can be better prepared, and we can take tax burdens off of our citizens by adopting an indexed fund here that will still accomplish the goal of providing a safety net to those who need that. There are, and I want to acknowledge this, some detriments to the system we have here. It is true that unemployment and economic conditions generally are not evenly distributed across the state. There are disparate economic realities in different parts of the state. The job conditions, the job availabilities in places like Allendale are not the same as the job availabilities in places like Greenville. And so I recognize that, but there are certain practical realities to administering a program of this scale. We have to understand that at some point, our high-minded philosophies have to end up in a program that our government can administer. And so the only data that we can reliably use to achieve these ends are on a statewide level. I can talk more about that if we need, but I want to acknowledge that because as some of my colleagues in committee raised the point, it is an issue that is not immediately resolved in this bill, but those variabilities are not so great that we cannot still achieve the principal goal of providing unemployment insurance protection for all South Carolinians, with also capturing the economic realities that exist across the state. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to take any questions. I've seen hands popping up and down.
All right, well, they pop up and down. I've got a list of them. So Mr. Brandon Newton is the first one recognized. Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Caskey, taking a couple of questions here. So can we kind of start, I guess, kind of a little bit back at the beginning? What makes someone eligible for unemployment? What situations does someone have the ability to receive unemployment benefits?
Yes, sir. I appreciate the question. There are general guidelines that are established in in Title 41 of our code, and there's a general eligibility, and then there are two separate components with regard to situation and monetary conditions. And so generally, eligibility is established by being unemployed or having your hours reduced. If you were currently working less than full-time, which is defined as 30 hours a week, due to being out of work and are earning less than your weekly benefit amount, this is considered being unemployed. There is a requirement that you, when filing a claim, do identify all incomes to DEW. And if you are unemployed or had your hours reduced, that cannot be the fault of yourself. That must be due to some external factor, i.e. being fired, being let go, being laid off. You have to be able to work and available to work and available to take what is called suitable work. Suitable work is defined in the code as any trade, occupation, or business in which you are qualified based on your training or experience and which pays at least 90% of your previous salary during your first 8 weeks of during your first 8 paid weeks of unemployment and 75% of your previous salary after 8 paid weeks of unemployment. The two components that I talked about are your situational requirements. Again, you've got to be unemployed. It was not your fault. You're able and available to work. While you're on unemployment, there are requirements for you to conduct searches for work through the SC Works online services. And then again, you have to establish the monetary basis to receive the benefits, which is to have at least $1,092 in covered employment with an employer who paid unemployment insurance taxes during the base period's highest quarter, have earned at least $4,455 from covered employment during the base period, and have total base period wages that are equal to or exceed 1.5 times the high quarter wages total. And as I'm sure your next question is, what is a base period? I anticipated that, and I went to the code. The base period is defined as wages earned during 1 year of insured work. Base period wages typically establish the monetary benefits for UI, and there are 2 methods used for calculating that base period, which I can talk about if you're interested, but I think that answers at least the first part of your question.
Just last question, just what disqualifies someone from this? So You talk about what makes you eligible. What's the disqualification from these benefits?
Yes, sir. One is disqualified from
We don't
eligibility
know.
for
We don't know
unemployment
anything.
insurance
I'm going to
benefits.
rewind it on the YouTube side back
uh,
after they're
based
done.
on earning more money, right? If you return to the workforce, if you if you left work voluntarily without good cause, that would be a basis for disqualification. Being
I
discharged
just
for
want them to get through
misconduct
this first.
connected with the employment, being discharged for cause other than misconduct, refusing to accept a suitable job offer from an SC Works center or employer, voluntarily retiring or becoming unemployed as a part of a labor dispute. Okay, thank you, sir.
Mr. Brandon Cox is recognized for a question. Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Caskey, who funds the unemployment insurance in South Carolina?
Yes, sir. There are two funding sources. There's a federal component under the Federal Unemployment Tax Act, which was adopted in the early 70s, and also the state component, which is paid by businesses, employers.
So what does the federal system do for our unemployment in South Carolina?
So this is where it gets even more complicated. Under the Federal Unemployment Tax Act, there is a tax paid on the federal side that then subsidizes if the state has an unemployment insurance program that complies with the federal requirements, there is an offset. And that's important because whenever we're making changes to our unemployment insurance scheme, what we have to do is ensure we comply with the federal requirements, because were we to not do that, and this is really important as we consider this, we would lose directly $30 million provided by the U.S. Department of Labor for administrative funding associated with our unemployment insurance program. And South Carolina employers would lose that funding offset. It's a tax credit that would amount to $729 million more having to be paid by South Carolina employers. And I emphasize that. So at every step, we've tried to take this bill to make sure that we are only doing those things that we know within the best judgment of the agency are in compliance with the federal requirements. Because as I'm sure you well know, anytime the federal government is involved, things are hopelessly and needlessly complex. Thanks, Washington.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Mitchell is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Caskey. Just a couple questions. What are the other states surrounding us? What are they doing when it comes to this?
Thank you for that question. And before I forget, I do want to emphasize again, I have an amendment. I'll come back up for it in a bit that will modify this slightly to a quarterly calculation as opposed to semi-annual calculation. Pretty sure I said that, but I tend to black out when I'm standing here, and I want to make sure I mention that.
I feel that too.
So there are a number of states that do indexing like this, again, trying to reconcile economic conditions and unemployment insurance eligibility periods. So Florida adopted a similar framework in 2011, Georgia in 2012, North Carolina in 2013, Kansas in 2014, Alabama in 2019, Oklahoma 2021, Kentucky 2021, Tennessee 2021. Arizona has had a version of indexing for a long time, and Idaho has had one for at least 20 years.
Thank you for that information, Mr. Caskey. Do we have any information or data on how it's worked for them?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do we have any data from these states saying how indexing has worked for them?
Yeah, so after indexing, North Carolina was able to pay off the federal loans that it took on to ensure that its unemployment insurance trust fund was solvent. As it will probably come as no great surprise to you, the feds do require that you have a solvent insurance trust fund. And if you don't,
Caskey, I hate to interrupt you during this intriguing question, but your 10 minutes has expired on this amendment. Mr. Hart is recognized to speak on the amendment. Mr. Hart.
Oh boy.
Mr. Hart is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My dear friend, Mr. Caskey, I do want to put some things into perspective and give some slight pushback to some of the information that he gave in reference to unemployment. And some of the perspective that we're speaking about and that I want to talk about and to put in perspective for unemployment is, Blake, if you could put it up. One thing we have to be clear about unemployment in this state and even in this country, but in particular in the state. CEOs are not filing for unemployment. Unemployment is being filed by the rank and file workers. And if you look at the exhibit, you see what the rank and file employers are making in the state. $5 bill, 2 $1 bills, and a quarter. $7.25. And the last time that the minimum wage was raised was in 2009. That was 15 years ago. We've had over 15 iPhones since then. Minimum wage has not raised. We had a governor that said hell will freeze over if we do anything for unionized or labor in this state. He didn't mention anything about $7.25. You can't do anything off of $7.25. Absolutely nothing. So here's the particular thing about unemployment that I do want to give some pushback to what Mr. Caskey said. He said you want to disincentivize people staying on unemployment, but guess what? The only way that you can stay on unemployment, you have to verify that you're seeking employment every week. You have to file it. You can't sit at home on the couch eating a turkey sandwich and some Doritos and take unemployment. First of all, you can't even buy the turkey sandwich and the Doritos off of $7.25. The most expensive vehicle that you will push and use today is a shopping cart. That's the most expensive vehicle. CEOs are not filing for unemployment. Here's the other thing about unemployment. If you're injured, workers' comp, and you file a workers' comp claim, and you settle the claim, guess what they ask you to do? Quit your job. The carrier will ask you, if we are going to pay you any type of settlement, you have to quit your job. They call
No,
it,
they
but let me
skipped
back
it.
up.
I'm going to rewind it as soon as they're
They
done.
don't say you have to quit. You know what they do? They make it real fancy for you. They say, we're going to pay you to voluntarily resign. And somebody, please ask me, how much do they pay you to voluntarily resign? Somebody ask me. $100. They pay you $100 to voluntarily resign if you file a workers' comp claim. Here's the other part. If you make $7.25 in the state and you're injured on the job and you can't work, you don't get paid $7.25. You know what you get? 66 2/3 of your wage of $7.25. You get 66 2/3 of that. You want to go a step further? If you're killed, if you die on the job, that's the ultimate. If you die on your job and you're making $7.25, you know how much you get? You don't multiply $7.25 by 500 weeks, because in workers' comp, the most you can get is 500 weeks. You have to commute that value, and it's about 416 weeks. So you don't multiply the 725 by 416, you multiply what your comp rate is by 416 weeks, and your family gets that. It comes out to roughly a little under $100,000 that your family gets because you were killed on the job. So I only got up here to put some perspective about who is on unemployment. You have to do everything electronically.
You have to give verification that you're seeking jobs. You have to give verification of your identification. So people are just not on unemployment living in the lap of luxury. It just doesn't exist. Not here in South Carolina, it doesn't exist. I haven't seen it. I don't know if you guys seen it. Have you seen the price of petrol, gas? Have you seen the price of it? You can't buy it on $7.25. You can't do it. I've had a bill every year, every single year, that said, let's raise the minimum wage to $15 in South Carolina, which still is not enough. Never gone through. Even had somebody in my own party block the bill when I tried to get it to the floor. If you go to some of these surrounding counties, you go to Bamberg, Allendale, Jasper's changing a little more, but you go to some of these smaller counties, Fairfield County, and the unemployment rate is much higher. Not because there are no jobs, it's just people just don't have the access. If you live, matter of fact, you know, who lives in Beaufort? All those beautiful tourist jobs that you have in Beaufort, you know where those people come from? They don't live in Beaufort. You know where they come from, right? They come from Allendale. They come from Colleton. Mr. Rivers, you know that. The folks who clean those hotels and those resorts don't live on those hotels and resorts. They're bussed in. And they're making $7.25 an hour. And if they're a supervisor, team leader, they're making $9.25 an hour. Who wants to file unemployment? Because you don't get your whole salary if you file unemployment. So while I appreciate the efforts to disincentivize unemployment, we need to put it into perspective. People are not just filing unemployment. Just doesn't happen. Not where I'm from. So if we're going to do this, I also say, why don't we support the increase in the minimum wage? Why not? Why don't we support a livable wage so people can help raise and support their families? As we say, putting food on the table. Why don't we do that to help folks out in South Carolina? And I appreciate
It was
all
on the
efforts
on
that
the
we've
agenda,
done
and then they just
for businesses
went past it. So
and
I don't know.
industry in this
I'm gonna
state. And I'll stop there,
rewind in
Mr.
a minute.
Speaker. I will.
Mr. Alexander is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hart, you mentioned earlier that
Okay.
these folks who are not
I'm
looking
gonna
for a job and receiving benefits,
change this. Give
do
me a
you
second.
know that not only do they have to show that they applied for one job, every week they have to go and show that they applied for 3 jobs, not one. Every week, if you're receiving unemployment, do you realize that they have to apply for 3 job applications and turn it in?
You're absolutely. I'm glad. Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Alexander. You're right. They do have to show that they're actively seeking employment from 3 jobs. But in addition to that, they got to show that they're taking training classes. They have to prove it to get the unemployment. You can't just sit home and get unemployment.
And do you realize too that when someone resigns, that basically disqualified them from receiving unemployment?
That is absolutely right.
You know, they're asking you to resign, but then you're put in a category saying, quote unquote, you quit, which disqualified you for about 12 weeks, whereby they're only receiving 18 weeks of unemployment, basically. Do you know that?
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Alexander.
Mr. Representative Hart, who benefit from this new process here that we're trying to put in place? Who benefits?
The employer.
Who benefits with this new process? This what you call it? What?
The employer. The
employee.
All employers pay unemployment insurance tax. You have to pay that.
Right.
And it is supposed to benefit the employer to save them on the money that they pay for the unemployment tax.
Do you realize, Mr. Hart, that if I was to go and apply, or someone go to apply for benefits, the company will send someone down there to try to go to court or go to hearing to try to disqualify them from receiving benefits, even though they've worked and showed that they've done all that?
That is correct. We actually appoint the commissioners who hear those hearings, the appellate board.
Right.
For when someone files for unemployment, if the employer disputes that, there needs to be a hearing.
Mr.
And
Hart,
then if they disagree, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to, I was trying not to cut you off midstream. You want your second 10? Your
Yes, sir.
first 10. Mr. Hart's recognized for a second 10. Mr. Hart, you continue to explain.
I didn't know my voice been on 10 minutes. Go ahead.
So the employee benefits.
All right, they're arguing
That's
this,
correct,
that, and
the
the other.
employee
So
benefits.
we're going to go back.
She don't want to pay out that additional dollars.
What,
Correct.
Okay.
what they heard earlier.
So we are
Don't get
doing this
tired
for
of
the
it.
employee.
So let's do. You can see this. Yes, the chat's going to get jumbled, but just listen here for a second. All right.
We are now on veto has been continued. All right.
That's
So
right.
we're on Senate amendments 3594, which is
Here we go.
Mr. Cox. Mr. Cox raises 24-hour point, sustained.
Cox, 24.
We're now in the motion period. Mr. Forrest moves that we
Yes,
dispense
ma'am.
with the balance of the motion period. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, ayes have it. Motion period is suspended. Now that brings us to second reading, statewide contested bills. Clerk will read.
First bill on the agenda is 3608.
Okay. And what I think that means is I think that means that they're going to mess with it tomorrow. And I don't know if they are, but they read it and then they went, 24-hour points. I think that means move it back to 24 hours. We'll see. I'll check the agenda and see what happens after that. But I'm not going to watch the rest of this because there's nothing. There's nothing they're going to go over. They've already gone over everything in the agenda. So they're just going over this last bill and that's it. And honestly, I really don't care whether this bill passes or not. It's probably not going to pass. It's probably going to fail. So either way, we'll see what happens tomorrow. Yep. Another day, another of taking my dollars and running. That's just how it goes. All right. Well, we'll see you guys later. I'm going to go get some lunch. You guys take it easy. How do I turn this damn thing off? Here it is.